What an honor it is to be here among you for the 49th community celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My thanks to the Seattle Colleges event organizers, particularly Ernest Phillips, Barb Childs, and DeAndre Fisher. I also want to thank and acknowledge DeAndre, not only for the invitation, but for his energy and his dedication to university equity and justice. I'm overwhelmed, overjoyed to keynote such an important event and during such an important moment in our national story. I also congratulate Seattle Colleges for its creative thinking in establishing the Baldwin Project, named for radical thinker and writer James Baldwin, who Toni Morrison remembered at his death as having crowned us. That is, as having crowned Black people through helping us to know ourselves when we read his words. Guided by the examples of these towering figures, the Baldwin Project can make a powerful intervention for freedom and change in the lives of Black men and men of color, as well as Seattle colleges. As I crafted my comments today, I located 3 opportunities. The first is a brief reflection on the King legacy, which I will offer to you is at the center of a long power struggle. The second opportunity is highlighting where both King and James Baldwin's educational philosophies meet to offer a vision of freedom. And I'll close with guiding thoughts for the emerging Baldwin Project. I begin by asking us right now in our hearts and minds to rejoice as we honor a man philosopher Cornel West has called the most significant and successful organic intellectual in American history. Never before in our past, West argues, has a figure outside of elected public office linked the life of the mind to social change with such moral persuasiveness and political effectiveness. We need King's example, his teachings and writings to minister to us in these dangerous times. Everywhere, all around us are examples of what work is needed and why. Every day in the headlines are tales of harm and atrocity, of widespread sickness and corruption. I can't breathe is not only the familiar haunting phrase from Black fathers murdered by the state Eric Garner and George Floyd, but countless Black people and people of color disproportionately suffering from COVID-19 and with disproportionately less access to healthcare options. And there is no time like this annual event to remember just how this phrase is not just about state police murder or viruses, but because Black people and people of color are denied a right to survive and thrive virtually across every American institution: housing, healthcare, employment, policing, incarceration, and government. Within educational settings, Black people and people of color disproportionately bear the brunt of expensive college tuitions and loan debt. Meanwhile, public schools, which remain a part of the assault on Black youth and communities, now face a mass teaching crisis. And in both settings, we endure the continued demonization of critical race theory, a white supremacist attack on teaching the truth of history as experienced by people who have lived on its underside. A terror campaign that once again seeks to remove Toni Morrison's novels from our children, to remove the reality of slavery from how we learn about the United States and this world, and to remove any suggestion that whiteness is anything other than the default way to be a human being. Being Black in America and around the world unfairly marks us to suffer the anxiety of knowing that there is no guarantee of personal safety. This is often a moment Black parents describe with their children called the talk. In the words of author Kiese Layman, America understands Black people as best as born on parole. And the election of the first Black president did not change this. However, despite what society does to us, the creativity, resilience, and world-making that Black people demonstrate daily teaches a lesson about what is humanly possible. The realities of Black life guide us in how we might begin to organize to fulfill King's vision for a life free from our current prisons. This is a serious moment. The generations are turning over. We are losing so much and so many of our wise ancestors who have taught and inspired us. Toni Morrison, for instance, and several most recently, Bell Hooks, Sidney Poitier, Lonnie Guinier, Greg Tate, Malidoma Patrice Somé. We speak their names. This is a challenging time and an intimidating one too, because it demands a response from us as a people, as students, as communities, as citizens, as thinkers, and as life forms, if we are to carry forth King's justice work. We should be very concerned with how the state, the same state that declared him an enemy, now distorts his legacy, sanitizes his arguments, deodorizes his critiques, and renders him and his teachings, even in death, its property, weaponizing our own King, our own Dr. King, against Black people and against freedom struggle. This same state invokes Dr. King's name in fraudulent and ahistorical ways to preserve white supremacy and ideas like gun ownership rights, racial discrimination, and the most conservative of political party values. Dr. King was used to scandalize Colin Kaepernick when he knelt during a national anthem, to shame Ferguson protesters demanding justice for Mike Brown, and to try to suppress protests against police killings across this country. It is disgraceful that during this month, King breakfasts, lunches, and dinners from coast to coast will feature some of the most conservative of state-appointed representatives who actively and openly support the capitalism, targeted incarceration, death penalties, imperialism, and militarism King preached against all his life. These acts intentionally diminish King's teachings to multiracial handholding rather than honor his hard work and struggle toward a world without militarism, racism, materialism, and poverty. He is even being used to suppress teaching that promotes critical thinking about this country and its laws. For instance, a few months ago, I organized a campus-wide panel on the attack against critical race theory and the impact of this attack on education and society. After this event was publicized, I received an email from a fellow professor who informed me that teaching critical race theory was against Dr. King. Specifically, he wrote that it was a form of indoctrination that undermined Dr. King's teachings and beliefs, and then wildly ended the email with a Dr. King quote about thinking intensively and critically as the purpose of education. While the quote is correct, it is absolutely misapplied in this context. The email and the professor's audacity in sending it to me is indicative of the kind of distortion of the King legacy used against Black people and freedom struggle. Now, if the professor was thinking intensively and critically, they might understand that critical race theory is not only aligned to King's teachings, but King is himself a critical race theorist. Critical race theory is not a departure from King's philosophies, but the embodiment of them. Perhaps in the simplest terms, critical race theory argues that if we want to understand US law, we must understand it through the lens of racism. I argue that King, imprisoned nearly 30 times by the state for all kinds of trumped up charges, is one of our best teachers and examples of what critical race theory is, means, and why we need it. I didn't respond to that email, but if I did, I would ask, who do you think King is? And this question is not just for him, but for anyone. They ignore or seem to have forgotten that Martin Luther King Jr. was unpopular among the country's majorities and was assassinated as an enemy of the state while organizing a poor people's campaign in an America he described as sick. They only remember a phrase from the I Have a Dream speech, but they seem not to take seriously his letter from a Birmingham jail in which he wrote that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, in which he wrote that Black people experience grossly unjust treatment in the courts, and in which he wrote of his disappointment with not just white conservatives, but the white moderate, who he referred to as the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom. The white moderate, he defined, is more devoted to order than to justice, prefers a negative peace to the presence of justice, and paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. He goes on to define the white moderate as failing to understand the power dynamics embedded in phrases used today like law and order, and how this becomes the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. They have forgotten the king that let suffering speak always, that let victims be visible, and ensured that social misery would be put on the agenda of those in power using his prophetic gifts to analyze the tragic circumstances under which people, and Black people in particular, struggle. They have forgotten the king that wrote the words, "I choose to identify with the underprivileged. I choose to identify with the poor. I choose to give my life for the hungry. I choose to give my life for those who have been left out of the sunlight of opportunity. This is the way I'm going. If it means suffering a little bit, I'm going that way. If it means dying for them, I'm going that way, because I heard a voice saying, do something for others." They forget that at the time of his death, King was writing the sermon and the warning, why America may go to hell. They forget his worry and his lament that he feared he may have led his people into a burning house after witnessing how the state uses policies we think of as progressive as opportunities to reformulate and retrench power dynamics. This is also, by the way, a point that critical race theory makes. And as much as American politicians shamelessly urge protesters to be more like King as a way to shut down freedom struggle, they ignore that if King were alive today, these same politicians would denounce him as a terrorist, as a predator, and a troublemaker, like they did when he lived. King and his legacy, you see, are still territories of power struggle, and those of us faithful to his teachings must seize opportunities to deeply study his philosophies, to organize, to speak truth to state power, and most importantly, to watch over him in death as he watched over us in life. And on this day, how serendipitous it is for Seattle Colleges to also honor James Baldwin, who was a contemporary of Dr. King and was actually one of the last people to introduce Dr. King in his lifetime. The date was March 16th, 1968, during a fundraiser at Anaheim's Disneyland Hotel. While the two did not always agree about every aspect of freedom movement, they both struggled with America's commitment to the belief that white people matter more, and the lies the country continues telling in big and small ways to make that belief palatable. They also have many similarities in how they talked about the purpose and method of education, that the function of education is for deep and critical thinking, that its function is for the development of morality, of character, of justice. In his now classic, A Talk to Teachers, Baldwin would go on to write that the paradox of education is that precisely at the point when you begin to develop a conscience, you must find yourself at war with your society. It is your responsibility to change society if you think of yourself as an educated person. This I offer as a principle, purpose, and praxis for the Baldwin Project. In the poem Caged Bird, Maya Angelou wrote, "The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom." Freedom. And that is why we are here. That is why I am here. And that is how the Baldwin Project might think about its exciting possibilities: to learn with men of color that the focus of any education should be for us to win freedom, And I am not talking about the 100 years of enslavement, chattel enslavement in this country, but our current enslavements in new and recomposed forms and how these shape the world we experience today. Educating ourselves for freedom means awareness of the very serious world in which we live. Students are entering college during a time of national unreasonableness, contradiction, and paradox. America dares to see itself as the exception, the most civilized nation and a democracy. A nation where all men are created equal, unless, of course, you are a woman, unless you are Black, unless you are not white, unless you're a person of color or gay or transgender, unless you believe in Allah, unless you are disabled, and unless you are poor. In my book, The Brother Code, I argue that the models of manhood for Black American men are in large part predicated on white colonial models, as the generational horrors of the transatlantic slave trade cut us off from indigenous and pre-colonial ways of being. A significant intervention the Baldwin Project can make is working to free men of color from the obligation that being a man is only possible in white patriarchal formations. This involves deep unlearning about who we are, who women and girls of color are, who queer people are, and how we might organize ourselves within loving collectives to fight for the freedom of us all. It is true, if some of us are not free, none of us is free. And it's our knowledge traditions that teach this very truth. The Baldwin Project can be a place where Black men, for instance, do the liberating work of redefining ourselves for Black people and the world we want to see. This is a powerful extension of both the Dr. King and James Baldwin legacies. Again, critically taking up sexism and homophobia as a part of this redefinition project is essential, as I can think of nothing sadder than for queer or transgender Black men to feel and be unsafe in an organization named for a gay Black man. Life has not been as fair or as just as I would like it to be. Still, I press onward and upward toward the light, and so must you. In each of us burns the fire of ambition, the fire of brilliance, the fire of bravery, and the fire of our ancestors who are from an African land of indigenous people and whose gifts to this world are unimpeachable. We may come as one, writes Maya Angelou, but we stand as 10,000. Carrying the mantle of King's legacy is by no means easy work, but it is what we must do. It is who we must be and become. It is what we have always done and who we have always been as a people. Martin Luther King did the work even when people abandoned him. Malcolm X did the work even when people abandoned him. Fannie Lou Hamer and Ida B. Wells and Ella Baker and Septima Clark did the work. Harriet Tubman risked her life in the woods, sometimes alone and fearing that she would lose consciousness at any moment because of a childhood head injury inflicted by white plantation masters. Never stop your pursuit of education for freedom. For the moment we do, we fulfill the dreams of our enslaver. And when times get hard, as they do and will, let us remember the words of Gwendolyn Brooks in her poetic epitaph to Martin Luther King Jr. as I close. A man went forth with gifts. He was a prose poem. He was a tragic grace. He was a warm music. He tried to heal the vivid volcanoes. His ashes are reading the world. His dream still wishes to anoint the barricades of faith and of control. His word still burns the center of the sun, above the thousands and the 100,000s. The word was justice. It was spoken. So it shall be spoken. So it shall be done. So it shall be spoken. So it shall be done. Thank you so much for this invitation. I wish good love, healthy choices, and second chances today and always for each of you. Thank you.